thing about your experiences with your emotions with regard to your clients, the basic, most important principle is to pay attention, to notice what's happening, and to use your emotions to make your work better rather than to let them get in the way of your work. So countertransference is kind of a big word, and we might just think of it as our feelings in our work. And so countertransference means all the feelings we have in our work, all the emotional responses we have to our clients. That means the positive ones and the negative ones. It means that one kid who really catches your heart and you just adore, and then that other kid that you just can hardly bear to be around. So it captures all of those. It also captures the fact that sometimes you might have a reaction to a kid. Let's say a certain kid you were working with made you really angry, but you felt, I'm a social worker, I'm not supposed to be angry at my clients. And so you tried to deny that feeling. You tried to turn away from it. Well, we know that feelings that you don't acknowledge act on you inside, and so you might act out that feeling. You probably wouldn't go up and hit the client, but you might distance from them or be more irritable with them or something like that. So that's all part of it too. And the thing is that it's completely normal and unavoidable that we will have reactions, emotional reactions to our clients. It's part of everybody's work. We're using ourselves as our tool, so we're bound to have reactions. And in the past, people used to say, sort of have the impression that, like, okay, you couldn't, if you're having reactions to different clients, it means you're not good at your job. But that is not true. It's just the way it is. You're bound to have reactions. Any feeling that you could have towards another human being, you could have towards a client. It's not, and no feelings that you have are good or bad. It's what you do with them that's good or bad. So where do all these feelings come from? Well, there's a lot of sources of our feelings about clients. One of them is our reaction to their stories. Some of our clients tell us very painful stories, which somebody's got their mic on, I think. Wait, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Who has their mic? So we have reactions to the stories people tell us, to the facts of their existence. Of course, we also have reactions to their symptoms. Somebody yells at you, says mean things to you, tries to hit you, won't cooperate, won't change, continues to be abusive towards you. All these things have emotions in you. We can all say, oh, don't take it personally, but that's easier said than done, and we're likely to have emotional reactions. We also react to our clients' responses to us. So there could be a client for whom you are the triggering person, that for some reason they just don't like you and they just won't bond with you. But just as much, there could be a client for whom you are the special one. You are the one they like the best and the one that can always help them calm down and stuff like that. All of those things evoke emotions in us. And if somebody thinks we're special, naturally it makes us feel inside and makes us feel like we're doing a good job and so forth. So how the client feels about us influences how we feel about them. By the way, please ask questions or make comments. Just raise your hand if you have any comments. And as we're talking about this, be thinking about people you've worked with that this makes you think of. Another thing that helps us, that makes us react differently to different clients. So right now we're talking about if a new client walks through your door, what are some of the things that influence how you feel about that person that's walking through your door as you first get to know them? What can you think of? What are some of the things that we've all been taught by our families, by our society, by the world we live in, that might influence our reaction to a client.
Based off their appearance and what they're wearing and how they're dressed, we might have a response.
Yes, their appearance, how they're dressed, what else? Their gender, the way they look, their surface, what else? Their language, their attitude. Yes, Christiana, could you say more about what you mean by generalizing from a certain population?
Yeah, definitely. So like, let's say that you have a team or whatever, and you work with a certain population of whether it's like substance abuse or something else, or maybe like dementia patients, you tend to group them all together because they have such similar symptoms or diagnoses or reaction to anything. So you tend to group them in together, and you kind of say, oh, he's just like the other one. And
Yeah.
and it's not fair, but I catch myself doing it all the time.
So your reaction can be based on other clients that you've worked with, that this person reminds you of, either because of they have the same problem, or even because they look like another client or something.
Yeah, or even stories are sometimes so similar, and you're just like, oh, they must be the same person, but they're not.
Yeah. And Josephine, can you give an example of how the diagnosis can influence our reaction to a client?
Yes, I was going off kind of the same lines. If someone comes in and they have a diagnosis of mental illness, a lot of times they're categorized by that diagnosis and expected to have certain behaviors.
Especially if it's certain diagnoses like borderline or personality disorder or antisocial.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. So let's not forget about race. We live in a racist society, and we get a lot of messages about people of color being dangerous, or we get stereotypic messages about all sorts of different races and ethnic groups, that they're a certain way. We also may get messages, we may have absorbed attitudes that certain people don't want to change. What's scary about this is that we may not even know that we're reacting this way. We may not even realize that these early messages, early conditioning from our society are affecting our reaction to a new client. So can you think about, well, let me ask you the easier one first. Can you think about a client that if they came in to see you, you would be happy because you would think, well, this is my kind of person. So one thing that might make a difference is how distant they are from you. And that distance could be a distance of race, or even age, or circumstances, or gender, or attitudes. Can you think of what kind of person you would immediately think, oh, I'm going to click with this person? The same background, a female of color, a joyful person, someone who's the same age, children. Good. Can you think of an example? Can anyone give an example of someone that if you learned that they were going to be your next client, you would feel some dread or some worry that, I don't know if I can work with that person? Worry that you would. An older male, a previous abuser, a male. So these are all examples of how a sex offender, of how we will have preconceived feelings towards somebody. Lots of things can contribute to it. And as with everything else in this, the trick is to notice, to become aware of when you have that reaction. And I was giving you an example of an intake, but it wouldn't have to be an intake. It can be any time in an ongoing treatment that you would have a reaction to a particular client. The interaction of the client's issues and your own issues is a profound source of countertransference or reactions, feeling and reactions in the work. Like, for example, I was supervising a young therapist who was working with a kid and their parents in one of our programs. And the father in the family was an alcoholic. And the therapist was telling me how hard she was working to try to persuade the mother to leave him. And there wasn't any sign that the mother had expressed that she wanted to leave him. Well, sure enough, you won't be surprised to learn that the therapist's own father was an alcoholic. And she wasn't even really aware that she was playing out her own history with this family, trying to put her own agenda on them. She thought she was working with them for the best. So that's an example of where our own issues and the family's, the client or the family's issues can get intertwined. And then, as I mentioned before, the more that we're being overwhelmed ourselves by the job, the more vulnerable we are to, and our feelings get in the way of the work. It's very important to pay attention to your reactions to clients, because they actually are your road to make your work with the clients deeper. Because the way that you are feeling, many people may be feeling with that client. Sometimes the way you are feeling is the way the client feels. The client is sort of teaching you the way they feel. Like I've had a young woman telling me about a terrible rape, and she's telling me with absolutely no emotion whatsoever, like she was telling me about a TV show or something. And I was feeling outraged and sad and upset by what she was saying. She wasn't, or at least not so you'd notice, because she sort of couldn't allow herself those feelings, but I was experiencing the feelings she would be having if she could. You get information about the client from your feelings about them, your reactions to them. You can understand what other people in that client's life have experienced. Like when we had a very cute kid come in, and a foster family was dropping him off and saying he'd been with them for 2 years, but that they did never want to see him again. And everybody was like, what? How could they be so mean and awful and so forth? Well, that kid proceeded to tear the place up. And pretty soon the staff were saying, we got to get this kid out of here. He needs more structure. He's making the place safe. So all of a sudden we understood those foster parents a lot better. So we can understand the kind of feelings that our clients have engendered in others. And sometimes when we're feeling so stuck and frustrated and hopeless about a client, we're experiencing what their life is like. In their life, they feel hopeless. And it's that hopeless that if we can pay attention to it, we'll understand a lot more about what it feels like to be them. We feel more empathy for them. Does that make sense to you? However, it's also possible that our feelings can get in the way. Our feelings can interfere with our understanding of the client, and they can interfere with our providing good treatment. And that is especially true when we're not aware of them. When we're basically acting out our feelings without knowing it. So I had a family that I was seeing at 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons, and I noticed I was feeling so sleepy in those family meetings that I was actually almost nodding off, and my sleepiness was getting in the way of my doing any good work with them. So I started thinking about this, and I was thinking, well, am I not getting enough sleep? And then I remembered that I have a family after them at 5, and I never felt sleepy with that family. So then I started thinking, well, what's happening with this first family? Are there things we're not saying? Are the people in the family depressed? Are there secrets? Because when you're talking about what's real, it's never boring. So I used that feeling of sleepiness to guide me that something wasn't going right in this family meeting. So then I bring that back to them. I don't say, I'm so bored when I'm with you that I'm falling asleep. Instead, I say, I'm wondering how you're feeling about how these meetings are going. Are we reaching what's important to you and stuff like that? And I use my reactions to move the work along, move the work to a deeper place. The key is noticing and looking at yourself. Here's some of the ways we can react that can get in our way. Sometimes we over-identify with a client, like, oh, that person's just like me. She's also Puerto Rican, and she also grew up with a single mom and a younger brother, and she came from Puerto Rico to the U.S. about the same age I did. What can go wrong with that kind of identification? How can that get in our way? If we feel like a client is just like us, how could that get in the way of the treatment? Boundaries, it can take away from there. Can you say more about that, Daisy?
So yeah, if you're over-identifying with them and they're struggling with something, and I feel like it can cloud, what they might need from us more, like what support and what specific areas. If we're constantly just like in our heads thinking, oh, this person's like me, oh, they're strong-willed, they're resilient, but maybe they might need more support in certain areas, and having that judgment may cloud us from perceiving that.
Good, excellent. And Crystal, I think you said that perfectly. The treatment becomes what would be best for you and not what would be best for the client. Exactly. Sometimes you may become fixated on wanting to prevent the client from making some of the mistakes you made. Sometimes when we're feeling hopeless or like a person isn't getting better, we start blaming them, like they don't want to get better, they're being resistant. Blaming them for the treatment not being successful because we're trying to get away from the possibility that we don't know what we're doing. And so if it's the client's fault, then I guess it's not our fault. And another way of reacting to the same thing is by distancing. This is something we do a lot when we're frustrated with a client. We just disengage. And that could be a physical disengaging. Say if you're in a group situation like a school or something, you just don't happen to be around that kid much. But it could even be emotional distancing, even though you're physically with them, you're just not really emotionally connected because you're feeling too hopeless and frustrated. Sometimes if the client is telling you, Daisy?
Although I have seen where it's beneficial to distance from a child if it's causing a lot of issues with them, or like something, a conflict between you and the child happened, and you need to fade yourself because it's creating an issue for them and it's triggering behaviors in them. I feel like it's okay to distance and fade yourself out to then give it time for them to heal and then reintroduce yourself into the equation to kind of repair the relationship. I've had to do that quite a few times with a particular student when I'm that safety net, but then I've had to restrain the student, and so I've had to kind of distance myself to then give that student space so they can heal, and then we can repair our relationship. So I can see the pros and the cons when distancing.
Well, what would you think is the difference between what you're saying and someone that's just retreating from a client and not interacting with them emotionally?
I guess the circumstances.
Yep, and also that what you're doing is deliberate. Okay, this kid is targeting me for some reason. I'm triggering him for some reason. I'm deliberately going to step back and then reconnect later. Another option would be someone who just doesn't happen to get to their appointments with a kid and just never happens to spend time with them, and it really doesn't realize they're doing it or doesn't realize why. Sometimes if what someone's telling you is so painful you can't stand it, you might start saying, well, that couldn't possibly be true. One of the times when it, as you may have gathered from these, that one of the times that it's hard, one of the times where our emotions often come up is when the person isn't getting better, because we start to feel like we don't know what we're doing. We start to feel frustrated ourselves, like, why isn't this person getting better? Would they get better if they had a different therapist or a different social worker? So rather than deal with those painful feelings ourselves of the person isn't getting better, we start to blame them and say, well, it's because they're hopeless, they're impossible, they're the worst kid in Connecticut, etc. So, and that's all us trying to protect ourselves from the pain of that we can't always help everybody, and that some people don't get better during their time with us. So that's one time when we're vulnerable to a lot. So what do we do about all these feelings that we have with regard to our clients? Well, the first one is to notice it. That is the most crucial one. And what do you think? What have you ever experienced that would be a clue to you that you were starting to have emotional difficulty with a client? Like, for example, one time when I was working with a teenage girl, I was at home on the weekend doing laundry, and I was thinking to myself, I know how I could get back at her. And then I thought, oh my God, I am in trouble here. I have to talk to somebody about that client. So it was my thought, the kind of thoughts I was having that were the signal to me. What do you think might be some other signals that would clue you in that you're you're sort of in an emotional mess with somebody? Dread before the sessions, absolutely. Thinking about the person negatively, feeling happy when they don't show up, yep. Now, I want to remind you that positive feelings can also be a problem. So if you found yourself thinking, I wonder if we're allowed to adopt clients, can each of you who have worked in the field remember a particular client that really got into your heart, that really was special to you? Can anyone remember someone like that? So if you start thinking, well, maybe it's, I noticed she doesn't really have nice clothes. Maybe I should get her a nice top. Or maybe I'll bring her in some special food today, or something like this. Or you start thinking about, could you take her out to lunch, or could you adopt her, or things like that. Or the kid starts calling you mom and you feel a warm feeling about that. Those two are things to notice, not just the negative things. The intense positive feelings towards a particular client are just as important to notice. So then the thing is to understand it, to look at what is it that's bringing up our emotions about this client. Why this client? What is it about them? And the more that you understand yourself, the more you can do this, the more that you can sort out what's you and what's them. So this is actually a plug for going to therapy. It's good for social workers to go to therapy, partly to understand themselves, what you learn there, and partly also just to learn what the experience of going to therapy is like. Like my supervisee, who was trying to get that woman to leave her husband, the more she had looked at her own history and how it had influenced her and how it was still active with her right now, the more she would have been able to catch that herself and start realizing, why am I pushing this woman so much? It's my life I'm acting out here, not hers. So you try to sort out what's me and what's the client in this interaction that we're having. And then once you get a sense of what's going on, then you can use that to make your relationship with the child stronger, or the person. So can you think of a particular type of kid that you really like to work with, or a particular type that's hard for you? Like I'll give you an example. I liked working when I was working as a therapist. I liked working with the mouthy, obnoxious ones. I enjoyed their spunk. What I had more trouble with was the withdrawn, passive type of kids, the whiny sort of ones. And I had a kid on my caseload named Lisa that was like, who was always sort of whiny and unhappy and so forth. And I noticed that I was starting to just spend less time with her and feel less connected to her. So I talked to some other staff and found out, because I was looking for how could I make a connection with her. And I found that other staff said to me, do you know Lisa's writing a novel? And I hadn't even known that. So I didn't go back to Lisa and say, when I'm talking about making the relationship stronger, I didn't go back to her and say, gee, you know, I really have a hard time liking you. Instead, I reached out to someone else to try to find a way to get to know her, get connected with her. And I went back to her and said, can you tell me about the book you're writing? So people are talking here about who you like to work with. Are there any that you found particularly difficult to work with?
Entitled children.
Entitled, okay. 8 and under are hard, Shatana? Are harder, or you like that age? Sometimes people do have it. That age is a real factor, that it's easier for each of us to work with kids of a certain age or adults. So it's all about self-awareness. It's all about knowing. And if you were to get a kid assigned to you that was the type of kid that was hardest for you, or whose issues reminded you a lot of yourself, or the key is supervision, because a lot of the times the way we come to understand what's going on between us and someone is by talking it over with someone else. A lot of times we can't really understand it ourselves without talking to someone else and having someone else help sort it through with us. That could often be our supervisor, if that supervisor is someone that would. So as I said, any feeling that you can have towards a client. It could be anger and horror. I'm just going to go through these. By the way, these slides, of course, are on your site. You can feel parental or protective towards the child, which can be a good thing, but can also be difficult. A problem can become a problem. You can be denying that what they're saying is really true. It's important to notice, to stop for a moment at the question of sexual feeling. Any of us could have sexual feelings towards anybody. If you regularly have sexual feelings towards children, you shouldn't work in this field, and you should get help with that. But if some of our kids have learned that the best way to engage with others is by being sexual. It's been their experience in life, and maybe very sexually provocative, and you can find yourself reacting to that. But once again, it's a matter of what you do with it, that you signal to. You are the person who teaches that child that no, not everyone is going to connect with them sexually, that there are safe people. There are people that no matter how much you come on to them are not going to have sex with you, and that they're compassionate, they're caring, they understand why you're feeling this way, but they are a safe person and are not going to interact sexually. So now, does anybody have any more comments on anybody we haven't heard from? Have any more comments on this whole topic of which people you respond to and which people are hard, and looking at your own reactions and using those reactions? Any questions or comments before we go into the exercise?
Do you think that when we do have a certain attachment to the children or the people that we're working with, when they do something, typical in their behavior that upsets us, do you think that we're more likely to take it personally than we would if it was someone else that we weren't as necessarily attached with?
Yeah, that's a good point, Daisy. Especially if you've been doing extra for the person and stuff, and then they attack you or have a bad day or something. It's like, wait, I thought you cared about me or something, and you see their behavior as a judgment on your relationship, whereas in fact their behavior is based on what they've learned in the past. So you could overreact because you're taking it as a personal wound.
So would
Good
that
point.
be a form of countertransference then? Like, you know,
Yep.
okay, because I noticed that happens with me, like with certain students that I tend to work more with behaviors. When they do something, I feel more disappointed, and I let them know that, but I don't know if that necessarily is helpful to them.
So it's great that you're noticing this, and you might look at it a little further, explore it, and see what does it mean to you when they have the behaviors, and what are you saying to yourself about what that means? Are you saying, for example, that this is probably exaggerated, but that this means that you don't mean anything to them if they're not doing these behaviors, which is not what it means. So, and talking it out with a trusted person can also be helpful.
I guess for me, it's more like I see potential and I want my students to grow, and I feel like they can go back to public schools. And so when they display certain behaviors, it's kind of like, come on, like, you know how to use your words, like, you know better, like, why are we going back to this when you can use certain skills? So it's like disappointing because I just want all my students to do well, and I want them to succeed and be successful and not feel like people are going to label them. So I feel like I internalize that, and then I feel it as like, what am I doing on my part? Like, how am I failing them? So I definitely notice these things, and it's not
Good.
good. It,
Well,
it
it's good
increases
to notice
feeling.
them, and that
Yeah,
hook is, how are you failing them, instead of more like, okay, they've had these behaviors for 15 years, um, and it takes a long time for people to change, and um, it's not a matter of you're failing them, but that would be a great thing to talk over with somebody. And yes, Crystal, you're right that one of the things that contributes to our feelings and our reactions is our worries about what's going to become of the clients if they don't change. And we know a lot about how the world can fail them. So that may result in us having some kind of urgency of like, you have to change and you have to change right now. Unfortunately, that never works. If you think in terms of yourself, someone saying you had to change right now wouldn't actually help you. But there's various things that we feel that give us a sense of urgency, like if you're working with a client that's about to age out of the system or is about to be discharged or something like that, you feel like, come on, I've only got 2 months.
Blanking on, but that was really good. So I don't know if he wants to pop in at all.
Vicarious traumatization is a word that means the way the work affects you over time. And there's lots of parts of the work that affect us as workers. And there's lots of phrases and words that people use to describe the effect of the work on the worker. The word burnout means that the way the job affects us, it has nothing to do with trauma or trauma survivors. You could get burnout working as a cashier or as a truck driver or anything. It has to do with your working conditions, your workload, your sense of the fairness and goodness of the place you work, and all these kinds of things. And just whether you are trying to do too much and all those kinds, and your the physical plant that you work in. So burnout can be part of any job. These three here, vicarious trauma, compassion, fatigue, secondary trauma, well, excuse me, before I say that, I should also say there's sometimes primary trauma in our work. In other words, sometimes people are actually traumatized by things that happen at work. People can be hit by clients or have dangerous things happen in the community, or things can happen at work that are themselves trauma. But these whole three over here about vicarious trauma, compassion, fatigue, and secondary trauma, they mean slightly different things, but they all have to do with working with people who've experienced trauma. And how when we engage and are empathetic with people who have experienced trauma, we often gradually develop symptoms that are much like the symptoms they have, that for people with trauma is in itself stressful. Then we also have to realize that we have quite a bit of loss in our jobs. We just get to really care about clients and they go away. They're discharged or whatever. Sometimes we lose coworkers because there's a lot of turnover in our jobs, et cetera. And we don't usually talk about our experiences of loss. We have lost because our agencies change or our programs change or we have to move to another program, things like that. Furthermore, we work in a system that is not perfect. It's far from perfect. So another thing that brings us stress is trying to get clients what they need when the system doesn't provide it. Sometimes we have to wrestle with moral dilemmas, like the system is insisting that we discharge someone when we know they're not really ready at all, or that we know a client needs a client needs a foster home that will stick with them, but there isn't any foster home like that. So those things also affect us. All these things affect. You could sort of summarize the effects by saying that they're related to the nature of the work we do, which has to do with our workplace. Is it healthy? Is it pretty? Is it do we have some control over some aspects of our work, like perhaps our schedule or our office environment or something? Do we get support? Do we have supervision? How much is asked of us? What are our caseloads? Do we have a sense in the agency of caring, of ethical and fairness? Do we have good relationships with our coworkers, our teammates? Then there's about the clients. It can affect us. Do we see improvements in our clients? Do we have a variety of clients, not all the same? Do we have a balance of types of work that we do? Like maybe we might do individual and groups or do some community work or something so that we're not always doing the same thing. Or some symptoms are more intense and take more of a toll on us. And then, of course, one thing that affects us is our own self, our own life, what's happening in our life at the moment, what's our previous trauma, what's our current support system, are we maintaining healthy practices, are we keeping up with the things that bring us joy? So these things all interact together to give us our work experience. So let's look at what contributes to vicarious trauma, and we're looking at both the environment and the treater, because recently there's been some attention to vicarious trauma, but people in workplaces tend to say, okay, you've got a caseload of 30 and you have to carry some more because someone's on maternity leave and you have to stay if there's an emergency, you have to be on call, and plus you must get your paperwork done on time, but we know this is a hard job, so be sure and get a massage on the weekend and pay for it yourself. In other words, implying that they can treat the worker however they want and that it's all the self-care is up to the worker. But in fact, both the environment, the work environment, and the treater have responsibility in this area. So in the environment, with some of the things I just said, that we need supervision, we need a culture that provides discussion of vicarious trauma, that allows people to talk about it when it's getting to them, that works on on trying to improve the system, that we have a lot of support from peers. And then within and a lot of recognition, that people have recognition of good work. And then in our own selves, of course, there's what is happening in the rest of our lives. What are our current stressors and past history, interests outside of work, and how do we keep up with our self-care? So these both affect our experience. So the actual definition of vicarious trauma was created by Laurie Perlman and Kay Sock-Whitney, and it refers to negative changes in the helper as a result of being empathetic towards traumatized clients and feeling responsible for them. And VT can make you feel hopeless and lose your sense of meaning. It's a good thing you are hearing about this at the beginning of your social work careers for many of you. Because even though it might seem discouraging, it'll mean that you won't think you're crazy when you start feeling these things, and hopefully you'll be in a place where you can talk about them. Because VT is really inescapable. You're going to feel this at some point in your career and repeatedly. And it's not the client's fault. The clients don't get up and say, oh, I wonder how I could give my worker VT today. And even more importantly, it's not a weakness on your part to have symptoms related to work. It's it's inevitable. It's not a weakness. That's what we want to try to create in our cultures, where we understand that talking about VT is not a weakness, it's a strength. But it does damage our hope and optimism. And if we're not feeling hopeful, our clients certainly aren't feeling hopeful. So where is the hope to change? It's actually the most important factor in the success or failure of our work is whether we pay attention to VT and to our own needs as treaters. So that's an ethical imperative. We can't continue to do good work if we don't pay attention to VT. So what does it do to us? How does it affect us? Well, it can affect our sense of identity. It really affects us in any way that trauma can affect anybody. It can affect our identity, our sense of safety. It can affect how we raise our own children, how we trust others. It can affect our own intimate relationships, our own ability to manage feeling, our own bodies, our sexuality. For example, you can find yourself when you're wanting to relax and have a sexual experience with someone or yourself to have intrusive images of terrible things you've read about or heard about. So it could affect your own sexuality. It can certainly affect your body in terms of aches and pains and tension. It's sleeping, not sleeping. So I don't quite know how we could do this anonymously. What for anyone who's willing, I don't know any way for you to send me things anonymously unless we all wrote email, which is just too much right now. So I'd like to see whether any of you have already noticed any signs of how the work can affect you negatively. Like, I'll tell you a couple examples from my career. One was that I used to work in a residential, and we had a loudspeaker, and if there was problems in one area of the residential, they would call out, assistance needed on the girls unit, assistance needed on the girls unit. We'd all run over there. Well, even to this day, if I'm in a department store or something, not that I am right now, but that if somebody says assistance needed in the jewelry aisle, I think we have to run over there and restrain somebody. But on a more serious note, I had a friend who is a coach and teacher, and he taught kids sports, and really nice guy. And one time he told me, oh, he's having a kid up to teach him how to water ski that weekend. My first thought was, I hope he's not going to molest that kid. And there's nothing about him that made me feel that way. It was the fact that I was dealing day in and day out with kids that had been molested. Has anyone else experienced anything about how the work has affecting you that you could write in the chat, or if anybody wants to say it, of how the work has affected nightmares? Absolutely. I always thought that if I dreamed about the kids, I should get extra pay. Don't you, Anna? Don't you think if you dream about work, you should get extra pay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
What else has people experienced? Have you ever had the experience that if after a hard day you come home and somebody you love says, well, can I tell you what happened to me? And you're like, no, I don't want to hear another problem. What sort of things? But I often hear that people feel, as parents, they become more protective of their kids because they learn so many bad things that happen to kids in their work. Yeah, right. Sometimes it's hard to enjoy our own joy because we're so aware of what other people don't have. Sometimes people say that they just feel, people invite them to do something which really would be fun, but they just feel too tired to participate. They just want to veg out and watch reality TV. Another thing that sometimes can be hard is that we can feel that it's really hard to explain to anybody what we do, because either they say, oh, you must be a saint, or else they say, why don't you get another job? Neither of which is very helpful. So it's kind of hard to explain the reality of the work we do. And then we end up feeling sort of lonely, much like trauma survivor. What would you notice in your body if the work was starting to get to you? What kind of things would you notice in your body? Stress, tension? Is there any particular part of your body you'd notice the tension first, like your shoulders or exhaustion, neck, shoulders, and back? Sometimes, what about your thoughts? You could have, your thoughts can become cynical, like see somebody, a man in his, irritability at home, definitely, Daisy. You see a man in a park playing with his daughter and you think, oh, what's going on there? Those are cynical thoughts that can get in your mind. And also your emotions, like you said, you can become irritable or snappish. So these are all things that it's helpful for us to notice what we, what our particular way is so that we can pick up on it quickly.
And I'm drained mentally and I can't focus. And it took me, it took time for me to advocate for myself because for some people, it's like being more vocal about not being able to handle everything. And I feel like it's okay to do that because if you're not able to help others, you're not able, if you're not able to help yourself, you're not able to help others to your best ability.
Right, absolutely. And I hope you received a kind response. So let's talk about what to do about VT. Crystal, sometimes do you say facts mostly when you agree? I think that's it. What are some of the things we can do? Well, a lot can be done at work to help decrease VT. First of all, the main thing is to talk about it, to have just like what you said, Daisy, that ask it for a mental health day or talking about how the work is getting to you is normal and expectable and a good thing. Then there's space to talk about it in staff meetings or other times, in individual supervision and in staff meetings. That we have recognition and rewards for good work and celebration, that we're not doing overtime, that we aren't being pushed to just do more all the time, because that's the surest way to wear people out, that the agency provides things for workers. Gym memberships is just one, but maybe wellness classes or yoga at work, or we've done chair massage at work, having gong, they play these gongs and it's very soothing. I'm sure there's a name for it. Of course, it's important that the agency provide regular supervision, and also that we work on having tight teams, having teams that really accept help to each other. And then we ourselves want to know how to begin to notice when we experience VT and do the things that bring us joy. Even if we're tired, we'll be less tired after we do whatever brings us joy. And then we want to look at the transforming the pain, which means that the work is very hard, but it also really has good effects on us as well as the bad effects. So this is the same thing. It's important that we cultivate our connections outside of work, because if our work can be very absorbing, and if you only have work, then you just get all caught up into it and it hurts you more. But you need a balance between work and other connections and other play and other rests. Finding out what restores you, what helps you feel cared about, what helps you escape, what helps you just chill, and doing that, making sure you don't let it be pushed out of your life by work. The way the work helps us grow is through things like the amazing courage of our clients and how people actually do change. And we know sometimes we end up feeling much more grateful for things that we ourselves have. Somebody just raised their hand. And feel more hopeful. And also we learn things. We learn a lot of skills in our work. And it's actually the fact that the work is hard that does make us grow. So vicarious transformation talks about how working with people with trauma also has the potential to make us better humans. This is a quote to that effect by Rachel Naomi Remen. There's a privilege working with people on the edge of life. The view from the edge of life is so much clearer. And there's also resilience that we build